So to kick us off here, you mentioned playing minor league baseball. What a fantastic experience. Like, can you share a bit about how that shaped your approach to sales and leadership? Are there any specific lessons from the field that you apply in your role today?
Absolutely. So playing minor league baseball, I think you get really used to taking a lot of long road trips at a high level. One of the big things is I am not a fan of taking long road trips in the car because I've done that plenty in minor league baseball. But when it comes to how do you apply some of the things that you learn in a career like an athletic sport into sales, I think there's three things that really stood out, right? One, that ability to deal with failure. I think the joke is, right, you can be a Hall of Famer and fail 7 out of 10 times, which is it's one of the most unique sports that you'll really see failure come out. And I see that a lot in sales, right? Some of the best sales organizations have 20, 30, 40% close rates. That still means you're spending a lot of time not winning deals. So that's been a great thing that I've seen that I've really been able to apply because it leads everything into confidence, right? How do you reflect and adjust daily? That's the big thing that I would take from that is when you're looking at failure and you're saying, all right, how do I apply this? What that really comes down to is how do you adjust? Because whether it's in sales or whether you're building a product or you're trying to hit a fastball that's coming in at 95 miles an hour, you've got to be able to adjust and figure out, hey, what is the plan of attack, either from my competition or, what I need to do in order to have success. Now, I think the third thing that I really focus on that's I think probably had the biggest impact from my baseball career into a sales role is focusing on the process and not the result. Right. So looking at if I was to play in a baseball game and I went 0 for 4, I think Dan, you and I would agree that's not a great result. But when we really look at it, what we're trying to focus in is the process. Hey, how was my approach? Did I go 0 for 4 with seeing 25 great at bats? And hey, the next guy got a hit and he was able to see and get more insight on that pitch. I think it's very similar in sales. We don't have the ability to control the result. I'd love to get this deal across the finish line, but I don't have that ability. I have to focus on the things and the processes that are going to make us successful and not only looking at the end result.
And then you moved into a leadership role early in your career. What were some key challenges you faced managing a large sales team early on?
When I started my sales career in management, I would openly admit I probably made every mistake in the book. One of those big mistakes early on is I was trying to teach everyone how to sell like I did, right? Hey, I know what works. I know what works for me. I know what works for our customers. So trying to teach everyone to sell how I did was one of the first things that I did in sales management. And very quickly on, I had some great mentors around me to say, hey, why don't we take a step back and look at how do you personalize this to each person on your team? So that was a big challenge, right? Outside of just, hey, how do I manage? You go from managing yourself to, in my case, managing 12 people. That was a shock. And I think one of the big things that I was also looking at, if we get a little deeper into how do you go beyond just some of those challenges, and this is something that I've learned from mentors, and Kevin Dorsey is a great voice in sales, and he really talks about this that I learned years ago, and it is avoid focusing on the averages and focus in on the individual. So taking a step back and really breaking that down, if we're going to look at a team of, let's say, 10 sales rep, and let's say our average close rate is 20%, those are great numbers for me to have. But I think the mistake oftentimes managers can make is, hey, I need to make all of my metrics off of this average. And the reality is, when you look at a team, you might have one individual that's got an 8% close rate and another with a 40% close rate. Now, what that will transition into is if I'm managing a team with all these different close rates, I might not need one person to have a lot higher pipeline than I do another individual that closes a lot more deals. On the other hand, right, I might have one individual that needs to have a lot more activity because they need, 15 touches before they set a meeting versus another individual that needs 8. So really what that's come to me, and I think where I've had some great mentorship is focusing on individual coaching to find one metric that a rep can improve. So rather than highlighting, hey, I need you to focus on these 12 things to improve your sales process, really look at a high level and identify, hey, what's one metric that we can improve that are going to help our process and see better results. From there, we can then move on to other metrics. But I think a big mistake that I see from sales managers is we manage the averages. So we tell our team based on all the averages collectively, here's what I need everyone to do. But in reality, you're going to leave off 6, 7, 8 members of your team are not going to have success because you're not focusing on those individual attributions versus the averages.
That kind of leads into my next question for you here. You've achieved some pretty impressive growth at Trivie. What are some of those key strategies that really helped you get there? Anything you could share on that?
I think at its core, when you look at building a great company or building great services, what we're trying to do is build an experience or a product that our customers love so much so that they're going to tell either their colleagues, their friends, their wives, anyone about how great that experience is. So I think any company that you're seeing what we would could probably consider hyper growth, 300% or more, even in startups, what that team typically possesses is that unique ability to understand some of these customer needs, be open to that feedback. And the great thing about a startup is these teams are often nimble enough to make those iterations quickly. So the customer really feels heard and understood. So we are now viewed as more of a partner and a strategic partner versus, hey, I'm buying a product or service and I just need you to figure out how to do it. So I think when we look at the growth of Trivie, that was where one of those key aspects is that we realized there was a problem in the market that people were forgetting information. There's great podcasts out there, great conferences that we might go to as individuals. But the reality is, if we come back 6 months later and I say, hey, tell me about what are the things that you learned from this 3-day conference that you attended, most people are going to give me 3 to 5 great bullet points. And while that's great information, right? They did spend 72 hours at this conference trying to bring in a lot of information. And the reality is we figure out, hey, what are we going to prioritize? Doesn't mean any of that information wasn't important. And that's really a big problem that we see in all organizations. So once we had that thesis, what we really wanted to do is partner to say, hey, what are those impacts? What are some of the needs that you need to see in a training reinforcement tool that's going to help bring this stuff top of mind and actually make that impact? So again, wrapping up that question, really what I see companies do well is to innately understand the core problem and really be open to customer feedback in order to achieve that growth.
So then how do you adjust your sales approach to fit the goals of say like a Fortune 500 versus maybe a smaller organization?
The key difference when you look at Fortune 500 sales versus call it your SMB or your mid market, your transactional sales, it really comes down to the number of stakeholders. Enterprise deals sometimes can have 10, 15, 20 stakeholders that are going to approve or go to bat for you internally to say, hey, we really need this tool. So at its core, let me back up. At its core, you're really selling a transformation to Fortune 500 companies. Not only are they trying to buy your product or service, but they have to go to bat to get budget for this. They've got to enable champions internally to help manage this. And they've got to go through some type of IT security approval. And they've got to jump through a couple of hoops to bring you on as a new vendor. So when you're looking at these complex sales cycles, really what that does come down to is driving alignment and understanding how we can collectively align on a problem to solve versus, hey, let's buy this. I think it's going to work. So I think when you see successful enterprise sellers, especially in the Fortune 500, you really have to find people that are organized, that can drive alignment, that are aligned with company goals. And that way we can understand, hey, is there a business case that will get a lot of people on board to say, we need this transformation in our organization. This is a problem we're solving.
And then switching gears a bit, what do you think makes gamification so effective for helping people retain information? And then how has Trivy used it to help your clients succeed?
The term gamification gets a lot of ink, and rightfully so. It's fun, it's engaging. You can go on to any app right now and find thousands of games to play. So I think at its core, gamification isn't going to help people retain information, right? And I'll give you a quick example. If you look at a company like Duolingo, they've got about 104 million monthly active users. That's a ton of usage. And at its core, what Duolingo does is it helps people learn a new language, but it does it in a fun and engaging way. And I think if you look at that example, right, there are a couple of key ingredients to having successful gamification in the corporate sense. And one is, hey, we've got to find a motivation for users to engage, whether that's a new product, a sales process. There has to be some fundamental agreement between employee and employer to say, hey, I want to do this. That's where gamification can really come in and provide these easy and bite-sized engagement materials. So rather than taking a 4-hour course and watching videos and reading through material, you can engage with content in these bite-sized learning sessions and blend gamification into the experience, right? So I think at its core, what we're seeing is that gamification on its own isn't really going to help people retain information. But when you can blend gamification into the flow of the experience, it provides intrinsic motivators to say, hey, I'm at the top of the leaderboard for this week, or I've got a streak. Think about Wordle. And every time I talk to somebody about the term Wordle, the first thing is say, hey, I've got a 364-day streak, right? I'm almost at a year. So these intrinsic motivators like streaks and badges and leaderboards can help foster healthy competition, but it also gives us a reason to come back, engage with material that doesn't feel like training. And that's why gamification can really make an impact when done the right way, fitting into the flow of work. It can really increase that overall engagement. And therefore, if we can see that increased engagement, we're often seeing a really good result on the information that they retain because they're going back and seeing that over and over versus doing it in a one and done scenario. That's our focus at Trivie. We don't overwhelm the user with games or activities, but we're really trying to enhance the learner experience to provide a personalized user led journey that's going to help them produce a better outcome.
Buyers now have access to a lot more information. How has that changed the way that you approach enterprise sales?
Most reports reveal that 70% of buyers are typically finding all their information before they ever reach out to a sales rep. And I think even what we see in this PLG environment, so a product led growth, meaning I could sign up for a product without ever having to engage with the user. Oftentimes, companies are often seeing a transaction without ever engaging a sales rep. So what we're seeing, especially on the enterprise side, is you have to lead with transparency in sales. In previous and even before 2020, there were a lot of advantages to holding information, whether that was around pricing, whether your feature sets or what you were good at or what you weren't good at. But now, whether you're looking at G2 reviews or other materials, a buyer can get a really good picture on the environment and what your company profile stands for by just doing a little bit of research. So with that being, the information that they can gather, what we really have to figure out is, doing great discovery. I think that at its core is where we're seeing sales reps that are successful is yes, the buyer can get a lot of information about features and functions, but the customers that are actually making a purchase, they are going to go with the vendor that's going to best solve their problem. And oftentimes throwing technology at a problem isn't going to solve that alone. We've really got to understand the human element to that and the tactical outcome, right? So, and we're seeing that with a lot of AI tools, right? Is that you've got to give it a lot of prompting, you've got to give it a lot of direction. It produces great results, but it still needs that human interaction. And from our side, right, that's really seen in transparency, being transparent on what we do well, what we don't do well. So we're not trying to sell them something that isn't quite fitting their need. We can really do an evaluation and come alongside that buyer to figure out if we're the right fit.
And then you've talked about the cost of inaction. How do you bring this up with clients and then how does that help you close deals?
So I often compare the cost of an action to return on investment. And what I mean by return on investment or ROI is I think so many companies have been out there really trying to sell, hey, buy our product and you're going to see this 20x ROI on this investment and use our vendor created calculator to walk through this. So I think in my perspective, buyers have just become almost tuned out to any ROI calculators or ROI calculations that are provided by a vendor because A, it's just not trustworthy. And B, it's not speaking directly to how we evaluate software or how we make decisions internally. Cost of inaction really refers and analyzes, hey, if we don't address this problem, what's the outcome? So let's walk through an example, right? If I have a sales rep that doesn't understand our suite of products, they only understand 60% of our suite. That means that, hey, they're probably not going to sell 40% of our products because they don't know it. So we might not see a result today, but if we come back in 3 months or 6 months, these are going to be great leading indicators to show I can anticipate sales are going to go down if they don't understand this information. So, cost of inaction is really just looking at, hey, if we don't address this problem, what's going to happen at the company? And what that really gives us insight to is, hey, what are the top priorities? Because what happens is if the cost of inaction is too great to say, hey, we cannot continue down this path, we need to take action now, that really opens up a great opportunity for a service or a product to come in and actually start to solve that problem. I always highlight companies are really trying to focus in on key priorities, whether it's OKRs or KPIs that would exist within a company. What they are trying to do is systematically go after how do we solve these problems and which ones are a top priority. And really, what I've seen over time is that comes down to cost of an action. What's the cost of an action to not address this problem versus addressing it? And that's really where you can find out where you are as a priority on, hey, am I going to sell this or close this quarter? It really comes down to what's the impact of them not doing anything to solve this problem.
You've managed teams through a lot of growth and challenges. How do you balance getting results while also creating that collaborative and high performing culture?
Yeah, I think this is a great team concept versus an individual. And I can use a certain baseball analogy to bring that together. But if we look at collectively a baseball team, you have 9 players on the field and you're trying to win the game. You're competing against another team. But when you come down to actually the day to day and or pitch by pitch in baseball, it's a largely individual sport. A pitcher is taking the ball, only one person is holding the ball in any sport and you are trying to use your individual skills to create an outcome that's a win for everybody. What I would say and what I see in sales is, generally speaking, everyone has that fundamental want to be understood and heard. So, what we can't do is start leading from the front and saying, hey, you've got to do it my way or the highway, right? You've got to be open to feedback, but we do have to have what I would call frameworks. I think frameworks work really well to create these collaborative teams to say, look, I want to give you the flexibility to operate on how you're going to be successful. But here are some common themes that we need to look at in order to have success. So those could be certain activities. Those could be how we approach certain accounts or how we deal with conflict internally or work through challenges that might be with different departments. So that's really what, in summary, what comes down to successful teams that are high performing, but also collaborative. It's using frameworks and not having these standardized, you have to do everything a specific way, but give them a framework to have success where we can all agree on these parameters, but then give them the flexibility to make it their own to where they can have success and then they can operate at their highest capability.
And then you dubbed 2024 the year of efficiency. What trends are you paying the most attention to when it comes to workforce engagement and sales enablement?
I dubbed 2024 the year of efficiency in large part just to what we saw in 2023. Some of the best companies that have been around started going through layoffs. And in general, sales teams are operating with less sales reps than they ever have before. I think when we talk about when we paid most attention to from workforce engagement and sales enablement, there is so much buzz around AI. Go to a conference, I would be hard pressed to find that 50% of those conferences aren't talking about how do we apply AI to this specific field. I think what really has opened up, either from research or products or just the day to day management, AI just brings so much possibilities to companies on how to become more efficient, both as an individual and as a company collectively. So I think what we're seeing is that in 2020, 2021, a lot of your problems could be solved by, hey, we're going to hire and we're going to continue to bring on more sales reps to solve these problems. And I think with interest rates and just the economy as you see today, we've gotten back to the norm on, look, we need to extract and use our sales reps to the best of their ability. We're not just going to hire a lot of people to go solve these problems. So when it comes to workforce engagement, and especially within sales enablement, we're seeing AI impact that all over, right? AI generated emails and AI generated agents, co-pilots that can help users navigate effectively. And there's a lot of noise in the space, and rightfully so. So I think companies are cautious, but optimistic on where AI is going to help make their teams more efficient. So sellers can focus on building relationships and solving problems versus doing some of the administrative tasks that might exist within a CRM or doing a lot of research on accounts, things that AI can do a really good job of providing, detailed feedback so we can be better enabled to help customers solve particular challenges.
Yeah. And then speaking of AI, in your opinion, what are the key areas where AI will have the most impact on sales performance and efficiency there?
Overall, I think AI is going to make a big impact on how sales reps spend their time and what activities that they're doing. I think some of the best innovations that I've seen in AI really come to call it monotonous task. And there's a lot of reports out there that will give you insight into, hey, how much time are your reps actually spending selling versus, notating, right? So giving you an example of, I've got an account executive that has 4 meetings in a day for, I call it an hour long demo. They've got to update 4 accounts within their CRM. They've got to typically create 4 emails that need to go out along with next steps and then other collateral and information that they've got to do internally. So what happens is 4 hours of selling oftentimes can turn into multiple hours of creating feedback and creating these specific tasks to notate information in their CRM and also create these campaigns to now start to work with this customer to work alongside them. So those are the areas that I see the most efficiency and most tools that are really going to help impact a better work balance between the AE where they can spend more time selling and then take out some of these tasks that AI can help replace and just open up their time to actually get in front of customers more.
How do you see AI transforming the way sales teams engage with clients? Are there specific AI driven tools you're most excited about?
So I think the human element in a client engagement is still really important. And I don't think the sales rep is going to be replaced in that sense. I'm really excited about a couple of tools, and I'll give you some insight into some tools that might be in a smaller sense. So they're not the Microsofts, the Google AIs of the world, but really making a positive impact on what we're seeing from a sales perspective. One of the great tools that I've seen recently is something called Zinnia, which is a co-pilot for AEs. And the biggest impact that they've made is they can generate these customized sales playbooks based on a particular deal. So it can bring in all of the information that you might get from an enterprise client, not only the conversations, who the decision makers are, and create a custom playbook on, hey, what do these buyers need? What do they like? What are some of the keys, objectives, and strategies that are coming out in the news from annual earnings calls, which typically will take a rep at least 45 minutes to go research. And hey, I need to go watch this video. I need to watch their CEO interview. Collecting all of that information and making it accessible in one easy place that will sit on top of Salesforce or HubSpot within the CRM. It's done a lot to really save time for these individuals. Another thing that I've seen that's had a great impact on especially sales calls that we can record is something called Fathom AI. Now, Gong has been a longtime leader in the space, but for some small businesses and mid market, they just can't afford the cost of or need the intricate details that Gong can provide for these large sales organizations. And what Fathom AI does is it provides great summaries on what is discussed in an hour long call and then has specifics around next steps. So it can not only give you the kind of call summary and strategic overview of what was discussed, but it can give both client and AE really clear insight into what's next, what were some of the key hot points, and then what are the deliverables for what's next. So rather than a manager or someone having to go in to do an actual call review, it can lead to a lot better insight into, hey, what was the tone of this call? What needs to happen next? Another tool that I've seen a lot of success with is called Fluent.io. Now, Nate Nasrallah has been a long time leader in the space on enterprise selling. But what Fluent does and incredibly well is it leverages AI from these call transcripts to help build business cases. Now, for enterprise sellers that are dealing with multiple stakeholders, business cases can really summarize what's happening on all these intricate calls that might be pockets of siloed information, and then bringing it to C-level leaders to show what we're going to do about these problems and key summaries of kind of these key stakeholders and information. So those are three tools that I've really seen that are not your big market offerings, but they're making incredible impacts because they are startups focused on making a better experience for AEs. And we're seeing tremendous impacts on the time savings and just the efficiency that we can provide to the customer by using AI to give us the information that we need at the right time. And now summarizing that. So we're not sending a call and saying, hey, how many times have we had a call recording and the customer gets a full call recording of an hour and right maybe 0.5% of them will listen to that entire call. What they want are the bullet points. Hey, give me the 3 or 5 main points of this call so I can summarize that information. And that's really what I think these three tools can bring to the market.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It is kind of amazing to see some of these AI meeting tools like that.
It is. You're just like, what have we been doing our whole lives? But it certainly does save a lot of information. And just the tonality, right? I think that's the biggest thing that maybe there's a focus on AI to say, hey, it's never going to replace the human. And I agree with that statement to a certain extent, but I think you're going to be running through a brick wall if you're not going to embrace some of the things that AI can bring to the table to help with tonality, help understanding sentiment analysis, either with surveys or just information that you might have in transcripts or videos, and just being able to understand information quicker. I think AI's got a lot of capability just to help shorten cycles for us to educate and bring on new customers.
What's the key to maintaining long-term client relationships, particularly in enterprise sales?
To boil it down to one sentence, the key to maintaining long term relationships with clients is to build trust. I think when we look at successful transactions, especially in enterprise sales, whether it's talking to procurement, talking to your champion, talking to key decision makers, what they're really looking for are partnerships to the extent that, look, no one wants to be sold or no one wants to be put in an uncomfortable situation where they don't feel, hey, this vendor understands my needs. They understand where we're aligned and they understand like how we're going to hold them accountable. We don't have some of those three ingredients, right? What that starts to erode is trust, right? Hey, I don't really trust that they have our best interest at heart or they're willing to come alongside us to understand where the gaps are as they exist today. So when we look at maintaining long-term relationships, right? I think maybe the great picture is, hey, we took our clients out to a steak dinner and it was a great experience. But I think what it really comes down to in these day-to-day environments and these relationships where I've seen some of my best account executives and customer success managers that they've been working with for 5, 6 years, they really have a vested interest into understanding deeply not only the problems that these companies are trying to solve, but they're talking about their kids. They're talking about just these authentic relationships that they start to create. And I think that's really what, if you look at a great sales career, I think when you look back, you're not going to always remember the deals or some of the technical challenges. You're going to be remembered by the people that you interact with. Hey, what did we do when we were in the trenches? How did I respond when this client had an issue? That really starts to build this long-term trust relationship where you can come to them as their strategic advisor and they'll take your advice. So when we look at, hey, we're trying to build a long-term relationship, from a company perspective, because we want to grow that relationship both monetarily and both with, hey, what do we need to build in the future? I think really what that comes down to is understanding some of these intrinsic motivators, both for the individual to say, hey, I need to have some empathy to understand where they are coming from. And if you can do those effectively, that now allows you to start to figure out, how do I start to solve these problems? And ultimately, what is, hey, we start building trust with the client where they will both bring us key insight. They're going to listen to what we have to say. And typically speaking, that creates a long term partnership that creates a great client and customer relationship.